this video today, I am searching a little bit deeper to find my artistic voice and my artistic style. Here is the canvas. I am, trying to experience something new. So guys, stay tuned.
Before I dive into the reasons why and how I want to find my style and voice in drawing painting, I'd like to take you with me for the first few minutes of this process. Especially the beginning stages of acrylics are super exciting to me. A lot is happening here and I want to talk to you about it. Here you can see me applying gesso. Gesso is a primer that is usually already applied to most canvases. However, I prefer to add 3 additional layers and smooth them out in between with sandpaper. I believe gesso provides a perfect base, especially because it prevents too much paint from soaking into the cotton or linen fabric. This makes the paint easier to work with, in my opinion. And here you can see me trimming the excess edges using the blade of a utility knife. I did the same in my last oil acrylic painting, Floating Memories. This process helps me apply the paint more easily later on. Since I don't have to paint around specific areas, I think this result is a cleaner finish, especially when visible lines and gradients are involved in the image. I combined various shades of blue like ultramarine, Prussian blue, indigo and cobalt turquoise, along with burnt sienna, to create those beautiful transparent glazes. I used not only brushes but also a palette knife to add more structure and dimension to the piece. The upper part of the background is darker, more indigo, while the lower part is lighter with the beautiful cobalt turquoise. To add more interest to the background, I used white acrylic paint to create paint splatters. What I didn't show, because it's hard to capture on camera, are the thin glaze layers I applied using neon pink, neon orange and neon yellow. These layers are very subtle, but upon closer inspections you can definitely see them and they give the blue a beautiful glow. I must say I was really happy with the result. After removing the tape and applying fresh tape around the head and the peonies, I began adding the first blue glaze layers to the moon. My goal was to later work over those blue layers with gold paint and create effects where the gold appears to drip down from the moon, while still allowing the core underneath to remain visible in places. The brushwork you can see here looks rather distinct, and in hindsight, I could have used a larger brush. Once the various light blue layers had dried, I felt confident and ready to apply the gold paint. I didn't want the gold to look flat or one-dimensional, so I used not only my Renaissance gold but also added an ochre tone and white to mix different values. I applied the gold to the edges of the moon and the initial areas with the brush. Then, as before, I switched to the palette knife to add more 3-dimensionality. The gold paint I use, both acrylic and oil, are from the brand Schminke. I have to admit, though, that the oil version is so much richer and more vibrant in comparison. So if you are looking for a good gold oil paint, I can definitely recommend Schminke's. In some areas, I try to shade the gold with darker colors, especially where the light blue shows through and also along the side of the moon. I think the result turned out really well, even if the moon now somewhat resembles Earth. What do you think? Well, once the acrylic paint dried, I removed the tape again. If you've seen my video Floating Memories and how Liova's course influenced my painting approach, you might remember that I said I would use an acrylic layer on all parts in my next oil and acrylic painting. And I'm sticking to that here, as you can see. I also started the face using acrylic paint. This step turned out to be really important for me because it gives me a basic idea of the colors and values right from the start. I found it much easier to choose and apply oil colors later on this way. In Floating Memories, I started directly with oil paint and missed having that foundational guidance, which led to a few color decisions that took a long time to correct. What I still do exactly as Leo taught us is to work with larger brushes, like here on the skin. And once again, I can't praise her course enough. What I learned there has been incredibly valuable. I don't know about you, but I really think the face looks great with these broad, painterly strokes. Of course, small brushes for detail and texture still play a role, but before taking Liova's course, I worked almost exclusively with small brushes, and that often left me frustrated. On the laptop you can see my reference photo. You will probably notice that I painted the blue under the chin way too bright. But since I will correct it later with oil paint, I don't find it too bad. As mentioned, this is just the initial block-in stage to get a good overview. And to the right of me, you can now see my daughter. This was the first and so far only time we painted together. Just to clarify, I was working on something for myself and my art, and she was doing something for herself. Of course, we normally paint together on her kids' drawings, but I thought this was a great opportunity, because if some of her paint splashed onto my work, it wouldn't be a big deal during the acrylic phase. It would have been a disaster with a pastel piece, so normally I don't paint with her. Even though there were only 15 minutes, it brought me so much joy to share the time with her. And now you see me working on the flowers. I am applying the first layer to get some basic color information. So yes, here you can see everything so far, and I'd say it's a solid starting point for the next phase. Now we come to the oil painting process. Here on my DIY palette, I am mixing the colors together. My original intention was to mix the colors on a separate sheet of paper and then transfer the finished mixes to the left-hand palette. Why, you ask? Because the left palette is the perfect size to fit in my freezer. I always do this to slow down the drying process of the paint. But laziness won in the end, and I kept this paint up here and just taped the baking paper to a sturdy surface. Here I've already mixed the first skin tones and lip colors and have started applying them. It took me 2 oil layers to be satisfied with the skin. After the first one, I let it dry and worked on the dress and flowers in the meantime. The peonies in the top left are still in their acrylic stage, and I think they already look really good. After just 2 layers, I decided to further develop them in acrylic before switching to oil. But back to the skin. I really love being able to see the brush strokes now. That wasn't always the case. I used to blend everything completely. But now I think visible brush strokes add so much more character. You can also see this in the hair. My goal wasn't to paint every single strand, but to give a good impression of the overall shape. I focused on making confident, deliberate strokes. the kind that the viewers can really feel. And now we finally arrive at the core topic of this video. Why and especially how I want to find my own style and voice. If you've been following me on YouTube or Instagram for a while, you will know I mostly create pastel portraits. I offer these portraits along with graphite drawings as commissions. I love working with pastels, and without sounding vain, I am genuinely good at it. But I've also worked incredibly hard on my skills for many years. When I see a good reference photo, I am confident I can turn it into a successful painting. I already have the certainty from the very beginning. Some pieces take longer, others go faster, mostly depending on the subject. Is the background complex? How many faces are there? If I'm painting people, what kind of clothing are they wearing? A simple t-shirt or a detailed blouse with lace? Even when tackling subjects I never painted before like animals, I've developed that same confidence. Over the past year, I've gradually begun painting more animals. Recently, I finished an owl. I documented the painting process, and you will find it here on YouTube. When I got the feathers, I did have to take a deep breath. They were incredibly detailed, especially with all the little spots, and I'd only painted feathers once before. But that's how it is for me. When I see a photo that moves me, I have to paint it. I have also worked on 2 corals and just started a flamingo, all of which I will share online in the coming months. Even with the subjects, I still feel the same artistic certainty. As I mentioned, I love my realistic pastel work, but I also love the early stages of an acrylic painting. There's something so freeing about creating an image from scratch rather than copying it. The larger brushes I use to create those beautiful textures. I absolutely adore it. I feel I could stay in that phase forever. But the certainty I spoke about before, it completely disappears. I don't know what the final result will be. Of course, I hope for the best and give it my all, but during the in-between stages, things can look rough. Honestly, sometimes it's discouraging. In my floating memories painting, I felt like giving up halfway through. But I am so glad I pushed through because I truly fell in love with the result. The truth is, I'm still unsure of what my approach or style really is when it comes to these slightly more abstract pieces. That's why I've now decided to experiment across the board, including other mediums like watercolor. I believe this is a good way to find something that brings me joy and feels right. I initially offered watercolor portraits when I first became self-employed, mostly because it's allowed me to paint faces smaller than with pastels and add details using color pencils. I even created a beautiful watercolor wedding portrait for a client. I still think it's gorgeous to this day. But eventually, I stopped offering watercolor work. The pigments didn't always behave how I wanted, and large background washes often made me nervous. For commissions, I always wanted to deliver the best possible result, and for me that meant making the image as photorealistic as possible. But now, when I paint for myself, I want to let the watercolor texture show through and really let the medium speak for itself, if that makes sense. What I do know is that I truly enjoy painting people, and animals are growing on me more and more. Flowers absolutely fascinate me. I love capturing them. Same with clothing that has lace or texture. What doesn't really spark joy for me at the moment at least are landscapes, cityscapes, buildings or cars. Basically anything with lots of perspective and straight lines. That said, never say never. Maybe in a few months I will discover I actually love painting those things. I remember in the early years I used to avoid backgrounds altogether. But now I find them beautiful and important. They add so much emotion and depth to a piece. I am amazed by what you can achieve with acrylic and oil paint. I had already tried working with them before Leo's course, but I approached them very realistically. One of those pieces, a wedding couple, is also on my YouTube channel. But as I mentioned earlier, I want to find something where I can truly experience freedom in the painting process, rather than strictly following a reference. I also find the approach from the Milan Art Institute super interesting. There you don't just learn oil painting, but everything from collage to spray paint, from hyperrealism to complete abstraction. All to help you find your voice. That's not something I can pursue right now in terms of time and budget, but maybe someday. I hope that despite all my rambling here, you were able to follow the thread of what I'm trying to say. Sometimes it's hard to put my thoughts into clear words, but I really love it if you continue to join me on this journey in both creating my comfort zone pastel work and in exploring new techniques and subjects. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And now I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Thanks. Guys, I did some final corrections. Now it's done, and it's time for the final result.
As you can see, I am finished now with the portrait of Mallory. I really like her. It was so much fun to paint her. I had sometimes a few doubts in my mind, but overall I had a good experience with the portrait. What I find really stunning are those gilded effects. I think the Schminke gold paint is so beautiful, and I like the layers here in the background. I think it's really fitting, and yeah. Guys, if you like this video, I would really appreciate if you consider to like, share and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. Thank you so much for watching. I wish you all a wonderful day, night, evening, wherever and whenever you are watching this video. I hope we are going to see us next time. Bye.